Yeah.
So thank you everyone for joining us today. Normally, when I introduce forced migration in the arts, this series that you're joining us for, I say that we are gathered for conversation, and that we are going to look at issues around forced migration in the arts. All this is true. This is what I would normally say. But today, because of what is happening in Gaza, I think it is fitting that we take apart what we mean when we say we are gathered to look at issues around forced migration in the arts. In Gaza, past few days, we've seen people on both sides, Israeli and also Palestinian, who are dying. Some of the things that are happening amount to war crimes, they amount to crimes against humanity, they amount to genocide. And they also cause forced migration, which is what we are here to talk about. And one of the reasons, again, going back to why we are here, one of the reasons why we look at issues around forced migration in the arts is because we are concerned about the loss of life that is taking place, about how groups of people that have got power, that have got guns, that have got weapons, that have got bombs, are spending vast amounts of money on blowing things up, on killing other people, to try and settle disputes. But when we look at the history of conflict, we know that all wars end at the discussion table. We call for an end to the killings that are taking place against civilians. We call for an end to the deaths that the very same people who are plowing vast amounts of money into wars, they are the very same people who are also plowing vast amounts of money to building really hostile border architectures, fences, border walls, detention estates, who are paying other people to kill refugees at border posts, to leave them in deserts. And speaking for myself as facilitator of forced migration in the arts, I think these killings need to stop. We need to invest the same amount of time and money into ensuring that people who are fleeing these conflicts get somewhere safe. And we also ask that the fighting itself stops. People shouldn't be forced to leave because of conflicts that can be resolved by discussion. We need to go back to the negotiating table. We need to foreground diplomacy and discussion as a way of resolving disputes. Following on from that note, today is also supposed to be a joyous day. We are launching the Palgrave Handbook of Theatre and Migration, and a lot of us have got contributions in that handbook, and a lot of us have spent years looking at these people who are affected by conflicts and are using the arts as a way of talking about the situations that they find themselves in. So let's look at what the handbook says about all these issues. Without more from me, for now, I hand over to Yana and also to Steve, who will tell us a little bit more about the handbook and also about the book series that the handbook is part of. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ambrose, for this introductions, and of course we fully support, so your statement and understanding also the troubles of the world and so on. So just for everybody to know how this event will unfold, so it actually has 4 little parts, so the first one will be done by myself and by Steve. We'll talk about the book in general. And then we are gathered about 15 contributors, so from the book, so who will be talking about the chapters very specifically. And we brought, so the presentations in 3 groups. The first one, and I just wanted to make sure that everybody is, the speakers are on the call already. So in the first group, we'll hear from Ambrose Misawa, from Azadeh Sharifi, Daphne Lee, and Asta Gandhi. I think that all 4 people are present, right? So on this call right now. So, and after that, so we will hear for about 5 minutes from each presenter, and then we will have a Q&A session. After that, we'll go into second group, and we hope to hear from Sylvia Yastrovich, Kasia Lech, Miranda Faye Thomas, and Sarit Kaufman-Simon, and then go into the Q&A session again. And the last group will consist of another group of speakers, which will be presented by Carol Fisher-Songfry, Maria Berlova, Lisa Peschel, and Matthew Kossi. And then we'll have a kind of a general discussion, so related to the book. We hope that the whole event will take about 2 hours, so a little bit more if needed, but we also will be asking people to keep to the 5-minute kind of allocated time, just because, things, we have a lot of people to talk and would like to hear from everybody. I know that some of you wanted to share some slides, or images. I'm going to share my slides in a moment. So I guess sorry, I guess Ambrose will be helping us to do that. I also wanted to make sure that ask people once again to check if they have their mics on mute, because it is a large group of people and we just want to make sure that everybody, everything is going smoothly. So I will be sharing my, are there any questions at the moment, Ambrose? Are we doing okay?
Please carry on.
Okay, all right. So, and I guess, you will be...
Just to say that one person, Katritsky, Professor Katritsky, is trying to get in. So I'm not sure if she's getting stuck trying to get in.
Right. Okay. Well, maybe we can resolve this. Okay. So I will then begin sharing my slides, just because I do have slides, and I just want to speak briefly about the book in general, and then I will stop and give a chance Steve to continue and talk about some specific sections in the book and so on. So the Palgrave book, we started working on this particular work back before the COVID began, actually, and I think we signed the contract in 2019, if not earlier. So it took us good this number of years, to collect and to edit and to work with wonderful contributors. The book amounts to 60 chapters, and we're very happy to see lots of people on the call. So when we started working on the book, we were looking at 2 things this, handbook, would be serving. So it will be serving, being a kind of a reference point, so in the newly emerging and formed field of theater and migration and theater and performance practices. And it would be both kind of a point of reference, so for the more than 25, years, of this field in development, and we just felt that it would be important to make sure that we understand that given, so the amount of work that has been already published and the amount of work that has been produced, as we go on, so the field is growing. And as Ambrose said, so this kind of situation with displaced people and refugees and forced migration unfortunately doesn't stop. It only becomes more and more apparent, and therefore it unfortunate in a way, but the field we seem that going to be growing. So the book wanted to also look at the situation historically and to embrace as many kind of understanding, give us a perspective, on migration as something that happened not today, that it is part of the human condition from the dawn of time. So I wanted to, at the moment, to to call your attention to the cover of the book, so, and the image, on the cover. This image comes from the film by the Chinese international artist Ai Weiwei and his film Human Flaw, which was appeared in 2017. So we were very grateful to the company and the agency who gave us chance, to use this image, so, and we hope that it captures, the idea of the book. So the book, as I said, so we really wanted to kind of work on the idea with the field. So of course, it's really difficult to think about the field and thinking that one book can do everything what's needed. So we went on and we signed a contract for the Palgrave series, book series on this topic, and Steve will talk about it a little bit later in this presentation. So the book includes as many papers as historically starting from Gilgamesh, the story of Gilgamesh, to the latest at that point, so tragedy, the world tragedy, the war in Ukraine. The book addresses a variety of subjects, political problems, the problems of the national, the genocide, so the aesthetic forms, and so on. So it also wanted, to sort of, fill the gap in the existing research and the contra directions, for the future studies. And so on. So I wanted to also talk now briefly about terminology that is related to this particular project. So we're using very broadly the notion of theatre and migration in this book. So theatre, we kind of understand both as a designated form of studies, as a designated formal practice, including dramaturgy and including theatre done on a stage, but also as a performance, so it goes into much larger, much general directions, and includes cultural performances, interventions, and all sorts of practices, so we tried, to be as inclusive as possible, with this term. When it comes to the notion of migration, we also used it in kind of a enveloping and inclusive way. So we turned to the UNESCO glossary of migration, and we kind of started with that, so as a term that refers to the crossing of the boundary and the political or administrative unit for a certain minimum period of time. But then, you know, so we wanted to look at very different forms of migration, of course, forced migration, the issues of refugees, but also political exiles, but also people, you know, who find themselves in transnational movements. For us, migration also meant the professional experiences of actors or artists, you know, who live, you know, so work, you know, so from the moving, you know, so as an as a kind of a melting pot situation. So we asked, when we asked people to contribute to the volume, so we proposed more or less unified structure of each chapter, in which we asked people to do two things, you know, to contextualize historically the case study, to explain what kind of form of performance they will be looking at, and how they understand and how the case study explains particular form of migration, you know. So with this thought, you know, so we emphasized, of course, you know, so this the issue of refugees a lot. Steve talked a little bit more about a particular section in the book, but we felt that, of course, you know, the 21st century is the century of refugees, and it needed this particular focus in the book. So I will now briefly talk about the structure. So it's a big volume. Some of you, I don't know if you, some of us received it. So this is the book I'm showing to everybody. We received a note from the publisher that it should be reaching every contributor very soon. So the book is structured in 6 sections, and the first one is a kind of a foundational section that focuses on the major theoretical concepts related to the field of migration, including exile, refugee, displacement, asylum seeking, human rights, globalization, nomadism, and colonialism. So it has about 12 larger chapters, you know, so that written by Sylvia Yastrovich, Freddie Rockham, Lisa Peschel, Steve, Azada Sharifi, Brian Singleton, myself, Julia Pescic, Sarah Pilatsky, Varzera and Margaret Very, Harvey Young, Paul Raye, and Matthew Casey. So this particular, again, you know, section is important because it's conceptual, and every chapter looks at particular version of migration. So it goes from, as I already mentioned, refugees and political exiles, to a chapter on climate change, and the chapter that deals with digital societies and digital migrations. Specifically, I would like to point at the chapter by Harvey Young that looks at the issues of the race and racism and migration, and what he talks about migratory blackness in his chapter, as well as the chapter by Sarah Pilatsky, Varzeja, and Margaret Very on the relationships and the tense relations between colonization, migration, and indigenous peoples. And so on. So the rest of the book, you know, consists, there are 5 more sections, you know, so, and we grouped the chapters, you know, according to particular thematic focus. So we start with the early representations of migration. I'm sorry, I'm hearing some sounds here. Sorry. Yeah, thank you. So, and those early representations of migration, as I already say, you know, so go as far back as Gilgamesh and look at the Greek tragedy and Sanskrit drama and Shakespeare representations and Italian commedia dell'arte and so on. Section 3 looks at migration and nationalism very specifically, as without understanding, without acknowledging that nationalism is part of the situation, part of the cause, you know, to for migration, for global migration to happen. It's impossible to talk about, you know, this movement. So that particular section looks at nationalism and the forms of nationalism from the early 19th century to today. Section 4 looks at migration, colonialism, and forced displacement. And it looks at the issues, the connection between colonialism, post-colonialism, and how it this particular historical movement, created the situations of forced displacement. As I already said, Section 5 is specifically focused on the refugees, and Section 6 looks at the traveling forms of migration, at the forms of transnationalism, and how the actors and artists use migration as a form of form of living, creation of living. I think I'll stop here for a second, Steve, maybe I will let you speak at the moment. I don't know if I need my slides, or so should I stop sharing?
It's okay, you can leave them if you want.
Okay.
Yeah, it's good to have the flyer there. So I want to thank Membrose for hosting this book launch on his series on forced migration, and also to thank so many contributors who are present today. And it's great to see so many of you there. So the Palgrave Handbook of Theatre and Migration, as Yana has been indicating, has been quite a large undertaking. It's taken us at least 3 years. And it's very broad, as she said, both chronologically, geographically, and conceptually. Broad chronologically, in that the articles go way back to the story, the Babylonian story of Gilgamesh, which Martin Worthington has written about. I'm delighted to see Martin online. To the ancient Greek and Roman tragedies and comedies, and again, I'm delighted to see Rush Rem is online. Also, the early Sanskrit texts in India, and no drama in Japan. It's lovely to see Carol Sorgenfrey online. And it also comes forward to the present day with many articles, including an article on the Ukrainian drama during the current Russian invasion, and an article on digitized theater during the pandemic. And it's great to see Matthew Causey there. The book is also broad geographically in that it covers work in all 5 continents, such as climate migration in the Pacific Ocean, traveling theater in Nigeria, Chicano theater on the Mexican-American border, and Gringo and Criollo characters in Argentinian drama. It's also broad conceptually, as Yana has indicated, and it looks at different types of migration and different interpretations of theater performance from drama and theater venues, such as the migrating Vilna troupe and Habima theater, dance productions, such as by the intercultural work of Sidi Larbi and Akram Khan, the puppeteer as itinerant artist, and performance events as political engagement, such as Banksy's direct intervention with a rescue boat in the Mediterranean. In my own chapter, I look at the role of the nation state to control migration and the efforts by theater activists and refugees to find ways to confront and subvert it. I consider the work of the UN to try to establish human rights and the failure of this process as revealed in the work of Hannah Arendt, Giorgio Agamben, Jacques Rancière, and Thomas Nail. According to Arendt, quote, "The great danger arising from the existence of people forced to live outside the common world is that they begin to belong to the human race in much the same way as animals belong to specific animal species, forcing millions of people into the conditions of savages," unquote. Thomas Nail promotes the efforts of cities of sanctuary to provide means in which migrants will be tolerated by communities rather than being expelled by governmental authorities. I also consider ways in which theater artists have used theater to expose the activities of border police, and for example, how the play by Maxi Obexer called Illegal Helpers shows how German sympathizers have found ways to hide refugees from the authorities. I also discuss performances and activities by refugees themselves to call attention to their unfair treatment and their need for better conditions, and in particular, the possibilities to work in their new neighborhoods, reaffirming, as in the UN Declaration, the right to have rights. So as Yana says, also we draw attention not only to the book but also the new book series which Palgrave is looking after for us, and it's just starting to get underway. So we have a few book proposals in, but we're hoping that other people would like to forward book proposals to us. So please let us know if you have some ideas that you'd like to discuss with us. So thanks very much. I'll hand back to Ambrose now.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you. So what will now happen is we will go into the presentations and also the discussions. We've grouped the sessions in 1, 2, 3 parts. I'll be the thread that connects all the 3 parts. So in this session, we will hear from Azadeh Sharifi, who is an independent scholar and has a paper titled Post-Migrant Theatre and its Impact on Contemporary German Theatre. And we'll hear from Daphne Lee, who is at the University of California and has a chapter titled Diasporic Trauma, Nativized Innovation and Intercultural Predicament, the story of Hsinchu in Taiwan. And we'll also hear from Asta Gandhi, who is at Jawaharlal Nehru University, Delhi, India, who will speak on Indian circus, a melting pot of migrant artists, performativity, and race. And I will speak on the chapter that I co-authored with Alison Jeffers, who is my supervisor at the University of Manchester, on theatre, migration, and activism, the work of Good Chance Theatre. So with that as the introduction, we go to Azadeh.
Thank you so much, Ambrose, and also thank you so much, Yana and Steve, for this amazing publication, but also for your constant support that I have been experiencing throughout my career. I am actually a visiting professor at the Freie Universität Berlin right now, and my work is always connected to racialized and marginalized artists. And in this particular chapter, I gave an overview on the post-migrant theater, no longer as a phenomenon, but as a movement. I try to contextualize it as something that has arisen throughout a very hostile environment against so-called migrants, but most of all, these are racialized and minoritized people, Germans, throughout the past 20 years. This movement, this so-called post-migrant theater movement, established through a certain kind of artist group and a small venue in Berlin-Kreuzberg. And this small venue then exploded in many sense. It spread around Germany and the German-speaking realm, but also I think this term of post-migrant was also taken over by many other artists' context, and it is something that for the German context we use to describe the German society as a so-called post-migrant, where migration as a phenomenon has been transforming the German society after the Second World War and has been constantly changing it. And migration, so it's not something that it's past in terms of migration has happened and now in the post-migrant phase, but rather something that is constantly happening, and migration is changing. So the changes and the different waves of migration in Germany have come in the past 70 years, and on the different stages it has changed. But this particular theater, Ballhaus Naunienstraße, was and its so-called label post-migrant theater was very important for the visibility of so-called racialized artists and so-called migrants. When I use the quotes, quote unquote, it means that I am actually referring to people who either live in Germany in the second or third generation, or are even German citizens, but this kind of terminology is still being used to divide between the so-called white Germans and the rest. Anyhow, in this specific chapter, I am focusing on this theater movement and along a theater play that is done by Simone de Aivi, The War of the Squirrels, so-called. It's basically a performance on the different kind of squirrel races, the brown ones and the black ones, the gray ones that came over from North America, and who are invading the European squirrels. This kind of terminology and this kind of discourse that was used in this animal nature context, she used in order to speak about migration and what it basically means, that it and how it is how it is used in the theater, but also in a political context. So I'm not so sure how long I can speak, but I think for now I make it clear by that. And I think, again, this terminology is something which needs to be more clarified. Many people are using a different sense. Just maybe a brief sentence that the artistic leader at that time, Charmin Langhoff, used this terminology to describe people who experience migration throughout their own biography or throughout being a descendant of people who have migrated. And he used this kind of knowledge to talk about a society. So this is basically a rough description of how postmodern theater was at some point defined. I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you very much, President. Thank you. And then we go to Daphne.
Hi, I'm Daphne Lei, speaking from Southern California. So my chapter is about the evolution of Jingju and in Taiwan from 1940s to today. Jingju, or we call it Beijing opera, is the most popular traditional Chinese theatrical form in mainland China. And it migrated to Taiwan with the Chiang Kai-shek government. So in the beginning, Jingju was supported by the government. So in these few decades, Jingju started as a nationalist machine, symbolized Orthodox Chineseness, and to become a fatigued old form, unfit for the new political climate, to a most progressive and innovative traditional theater, and to today's kind of confused state in the world of techno-globalism. So today I'm only going to focus on like one part of the chapter, and a crucial transitional moment of Taiwan Jingju in the early 2000s. So basically, I'm going to talk about how does a migrated art form survive. So after half a century in Taiwan, Jingju was getting old, really, really old. Taiwan also faced a dilemma in the 21st century. It is clear that Taiwan is not China and Taiwan is not Chinese, and yet Taiwanese are not Chinese, nor not Chinese. So these dilemmas all became crystal clear in a college classroom when scholar, playwright, and college professor Wang Anqi taught a class about a traditional Jingju story. The story was about female virtue and pathos, but to her surprise, students burst into loud laughter. So the traditional Chinese female virtues seem so all ridiculous and backward to these students. And the classical masterpiece became a farce. So this shock immediately triggered an emotional response, 尴尬, And this Chinese term is left untranslated in this chapter because there's no equivalent English translation. So ganga describes the sentiment of awkwardness, embarrassment, and feeling a kind of feeling stuck in an uneasy neither nor state. It is extremely uncomfortable. It is a state you do not want to be in. So Taiwan Jingju was also stuck in this kind of ganga situation between tradition and modernization, between Chinese and non-Chinese, between diaspora and nativization. The ganga condition of Jingju was the product of the ganga ontology of Taiwan. And yet I argued that ganga was actually the major catalyst that initiated the radical revolution in Taiwan Jingju in the new millennium. I imagine the shock, embarrassment, and humiliation that Professor Wang experienced as a significant phenomenological moment, which was not so different from what Frantz Fanon experienced when encountering a little girl on the street. Fanon described the feeling of nostalgia, of nausea. He said, I was responsible at the same time for my body, for my race, for my ancestors. I discovered my Blackness. Here I try to connect the phenomenological and phenomenology and neuroscience in discussing the idea of ganga. The complicated self-conscious emotion, such as embarrassment or guilt, automatic physiological response, such as blushing or sweating, and motivation of behavior change, such as correcting the cause to cause the embarrassment. All of these are closely connected because the controllers of all these reactions are all located in the same region of the brain. So in a sense, we could say the emotion of ganga actually can be a trigger, can also trigger action. So in Wang's case, this episode actually launched her Jingju experimentation, and it was a path of no return. Many innovative Jingju plays were written and produced afterwards, and many young people also got inspired to join in such revolution. Although the future of Taiwan Jingju is uncertain, and of course there's not enough funding, it is nevertheless thriving in Taiwan right now in various forms. And as a matter of fact, I am going to host Wei Haiming today, the most celebrated Taiwan Jingju actress in Sinophone region, this evening in my university, UC Irvine. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daphne. And then we hear from Asta Gandhi.
Hello, everyone. Very good evening. It's almost 1 a.m. in Delhi, but I'm still trying to keep up. And thanks very much to Yana, Steve, and Ambrose for organizing this. It's so wonderful to meet so many of the contributors to the book. Although I wish we'd had this meeting before we got onto the project, but nevertheless, it's wonderful indeed. Here to talk very briefly about this chapter on Indian circus, a melting pot of migrant artists, performativity, and race. How did I set about writing this chapter? Of course, is quite interesting because during my PhD fieldwork, I had come across several performance groups who either work in Indian circuses seasonally or migrate on a long-term basis and eventually make India their permanent home, moving from circus to circus, setting up with their families here. Often the popular narrative which one gets to hear is that the Indian circus history revolves around the strong presence of Malayalis. They are from the Kerala region in south of India. They were a dominant group as performers and owners of circuses for almost over a century, beginning in 1880s to 1980s, which was then followed by Nepalis from the adjoining country of Nepal, who started joining Indian circuses in big numbers, especially women artists. So there were all these phenomena which I was coming across. And alongside, there have also been Russians who were a dominant group post the disintegration of the Soviet Union. Presently, one also finds artists from African nations, Kenya, Uganda, Ethiopia, to name a few, along with Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, Mongolia, Vietnam, Russia, and a few Eastern European nations. All these observations created curiosities about specific ethnic groups which have performed in Indian circuses, but also to identify and tap into the circuits within the global south, which are otherwise ignored by a larger scholarship. Most of the present research covers migrant artists from south to north or within north, but there is hardly any research on the movement of artists who explore these networks within the global south. This became one of my initial concerns. While writing this essay, I was confronted with the following questions at the initial stage. How is Indian circus history been deeply interconnected with migrant groups who have joined circuses? Circus artists are mostly traveling. What makes the groups coming to Indian circuses distinctive? How are these groups different from other performing artists who migrate for various reasons, socioeconomic to be one of the dominant ones? How has the presence of these multiple groups led to rise in further popularity of circus in India? What is the identity created inside the ring which is beyond ethnic, national, and racial markers? What are the transcultural modes of experience that these contact zones between multiracial bodies create? I identify two major reasons behind these migration patterns. Firstly, economic precarity of surplus labor, which has attracted both domestic groups and international groups to Indian circuses over the last century and a half. Second, the changing role of state, especially with neoliberal laws coming in, which has devoid local artists of further trainings in circus skills, and globalization, which has simultaneously opened up channels for migrant artists from other countries. I further situate my arguments within the framework of the embodied experiences of hybridity. I then study the subjectivity of the circus performer through a very cosmopolitan identity, which is neither local or national, nor international or global, but both at once. Now, the question that I used to conclude my introduction is, why is circus important in this context? Is because it takes an alternate position with respect to political and economic network structures that are propagated between nations and have different implications, especially within the global south. It displays the openness to other influences, urges to move across cultural boundaries, and challenges the performers' more traditional perceptions of national cultures as integrated and bounded. Circus, thus, in many ways can be said to be the first such space which constantly pushed the boundaries of nation, ethnicity, race, and gender, and continues to do so. For more on this, please do read my chapter. I would also like to mention that the framework for this essay has also now evolved into a book that I'm currently authoring as an independent, unaffiliated scholar. The book is on history of Indian circus and its performances, migration, and networks, and it's part of the series which is being edited by Yana and Steve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Asta. Thank you. Does anyone have a question for our three speakers? I think we might have time just for one question. I will take it that your contributions are well received and that everyone present agrees with you enthusiastically. So I've got 2 minutes to talk about the chapter that I co-authored with my supervisor, Alison Jeffers. For that chapter, we looked at Good Chance Theatre, which is a British, it started as a British when two young British lads caught the ferry, went over to Calais because they wanted to see what was happening. They wanted to see these people that they'd been hearing so much about in the news. And when they got there, they, Joe and Joe, they set up a theater company. And what was novel about the theater company that they set up was that as far as they were aware, as far as anyone in Europe was aware, this was the first time that a theater company had been set up in an informal refugee camp in mainland Europe. And out of that theater company, there came performances like The Jungle, the play itself, which has been touring, toured in the UK, it toured in the US, and was very positively received. And from The Jungle, there is also The Walk, where Good Chance took a character from The Jungle, the play, and turned it into a puppet, and sent her on a route from the border with Turkey through and all the way through to England. And since then, Little Amau has appeared in a number of different places in the UK and elsewhere, and is actually recognized as an advocate for the rights of unaccompanied minors, and as a call for better treatment of people who are seeking refuge. I will not go beyond this, but we invite you to look at the chapter. Good Chance is absolutely fascinating, the work that they have been doing, and also that the work that they continue to do. And they set a model for an example of how, you know, when artists come into a situation, what they as individuals can do about the situation that they are meeting. And yeah, I commend them. Personally, I commend them for the work that they've done. So without more from me, we go to the next set of speakers. We have got Sylvia Jastrovic, who is at Warwick University and has a chapter on the eternal immigrant and the aesthetic of solidarity. We've also got Cassia Lek, who is at the University of Amsterdam and has a chapter titled Sonless Mothers and Motherless Sons, or how Polishness wanted Polish theatre artists in exile. And we've got Miranda Faye Thomas from Trinity College Dublin, who's got a chapter on The Stranger's Case, Exile in Shakespeare. And we've got Sarit Kaufman Simon, who is at Kibbutz Sim College, and there's a chapter on all migrants, place and displacement on the Israeli stage. And yeah, so we hear from Sylvia first. And apologies if I have probably mispronounced many surnames. I apologize for that. Sylvia, over to you.
Thank you, Ambrose, for the introduction. You certainly said my name very correctly. And thank you very much to Yana and Stephen for this book and for gathering us all. And I'm so delighted to see some faces that I haven't seen in a long time, but very dear to me, and also, of course, some new faces. Now, when we were preparing for this, I asked the editors, what should I do? How should I do this? And Yana told me, speak about this term exile, because you seem quite stuck to it. You know, you seem quite determined to keep it. So my chapter was called "The Eternal Immigrant and the Aesthetic of Solidarity," and the Eternal Immigrant comes from a visual artwork by Russian artist Ilya and Emilia Kabakov, representing a person who is bent over a wall trying to cross, but can't really, in that perpetual, in that eternal state of being in between places. And it starts from there, but then also tries to come to terms with terms, as Yana and my supervisor Veronica Ambrose used to say about various terms in academic context. So without much further ado, why exile? Exile, the term exile has been getting a sort of a bad rep recently as being romantic, sentimentalizing, focusing on the aesthetic while taking away from the materiality of the political, social, existential conditions of being in a precarious position, whether one is a refugee, a migrant, an economic migrant, whether one is awaiting in a refugee camp or somebody awaiting in a detention center for their asylum status to be resolved, and so on. And these are, of course, extremely important aspects, and they're actually vital for what we are talking about and thinking about. But why do I advocate, the term still? Well, this sort of suggestion that came from the editors for me to talk about it, I do write about it in the book, in the chapter, in a certain way, but it kind of prompted me to think about it some more, and I started with rhetorical questions like why Edward Said's reflections on exile are called reflections on exile and not reflections on migration or on asylum or on displacement, why George Lemming's pleasures of exile are the pleasure of exile is not the pleasure of migration, or something like that. So so then I pondering about it and also thinking of this thinker in the process. There are two things that are very important to me when it comes to the term exile. First of all, well, a preamble, I don't think it cancels any of the categories that I've mentioned earlier, that are legal categories, that are categories to do with material conditions. And even in Said's reflections of exile, he does talk about how it is different on the ground than when rendered through a poet's imagination, for example. But why rescuing the term? Firstly, it offers a certain perspective of seeing the world from a kind of margin, from a kind of border, from this space in between that I try to talk about in the chapter with this eternal immigrant bent over that wall in Ilya and Emilia Kabakov's sculpture model trying to cross. And it offers a certain sort of perspective of estrangement. It does make the familiar strange, and there is a kind of epistemology in this notion of exile, in my sort of definition and view of it. The other aspect is really something that I just start to think that maybe has to do with what we call the aesthetics of the aesthetic of solidarity, which I try to just begin to formulate in the chapter that's in the book, and it has to do with a certain way of formulating the experience, and in a certain way of finding a form to speak or to act with that experience in the world. Now, again, to go back to Said's reflections of exile, he does ask in a way, can, or with reading this essay, we kind of ask, okay, can the exiled poet talk about the exiled peasant, for example? How do we avoid this difficult sort of or territory of giving voice? And I think when I talk about the aesthetics of exile or the aesthetics of solidarity that might appear from it, I don't have only in mind artistic works, They are certainly part of it, but also various modes of living together, of cohabitating, of sharing space. So I'll just, and I'll end with two brief examples that are not in the chapter, because I think we also should think further, you know, be inspired by each other's chapters, and also, you know, even this opportunity to add things that I couldn't think of at the time when I was writing it. So it's a good opportunity for that. So one example is a recent movie by the British director Ken Loach, and it's called The Oak Tree. So in that movie, there is an exile, the community of refugees, a group of refugees coming to a very small, very deprived place in northern England. And of course, the first reaction is hostility from most of the members of the community, because they are afraid that even the scarce resources they have will be now taken by these newcomers. Of course, that in a way gets not completely overcome, but it gets to a good moment. And I just want to mention this good moment. This is the moment when the refugees and the local community come together in the one and only pub in that place and start sharing meals. So something powerful starts to emerge from these communities coming together. So for me, this would be an example of an exilic form. This would for me be an example of exile, and it encompasses both the marginalization of this local community and these actual people who are mostly from Syria who came there and who now came together. So of course it's a film, it's a feature film, it's a utopian performative what we see. But it's also something that does happen, and it also involves actors who are not professional actors, who come from these various communities, and also similar acts of solidarity have happened. So to me, this is a form, this is an aesthetic of solidarity as well, and an exilic aesthetic. And the other one, just sort of because of the events, I think all of us are probably thinking these days, and it's at the moment the conflict in Palestine and Israel. And there was a couple of days ago an article by the famous conductor Daniel Barenboim in The Guardian. And as you probably know, Barenboim and Said in the 1990s, I think, formed this wonderful East-West Divan Orchestra, comprising of Palestinian and Israeli musicians. And he talks about this as a sort of, again, a utopian performative, but maybe I sort of end with the words from this article. And he talks about about his collaboration with Said and about the collaboration within the orchestra, and how that might bring us to think, to imagine a different ways of resolving conflicts and so on. So he says, in the current situation, I naturally ask myself about the significance of our joint work in the orchestra and the academy. It may seem little, but the mere fact that Arab and Israeli musicians share a podium at every concert and make music together is of immense value. Over the years, through this commonality of music making, but also through our countless, sometimes heated discussions, we have learned to better understand the supposed other, to approach them and to find common ground. We start and end all discussions, no matter how controversial, with a fundamental understanding that we are all equal human beings who deserve peace, freedom, and happiness. So in my advocating of the term of exile, to conclude, I see this term thinking in exilic terms, still thinking with exilic paradigms as a resource for a critical perspective, but also for a critical acting, doing, making in the world that might have a potential for a new political imagination as well. So I finish there.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Sylvia. And we hear from Kasia next. And I agree with you completely. We need a new political imagination. We can't carry on the way that we've been carrying on. Okay, over to you, Kasia.
Thank you so much. And I also want to say thank you for Ambrose for organizing tonight, and Yana and Steve for your amazing, amazing work and support, and congratulations on this collection and the series. So in my essay, I look how Polish playwrights, Polish migrant playwrights from the Romantic era to the present time engage with motherhood as a metaphorical vessel through which personal and communal experiences of exile and bondage can be performed, and through which freedoms can be rethinked and achieved. And the context for that is 173 years out of 194 that Poland is in a situation in bondage from 1795 until 1989. And these are times of censorship, and at the same time, these are times when the important political discussions are required. And with Poland and seeing theater as an important platform for such discussions, Polish playwrights in exile, in migration, take a formative role in relation to Polish identity, Polish theater, and broader discourses on Polishness. These identity projects also involve artists themselves, with tropes of motherhood facilitating intersections between exilic, individual, community, and country discourses. And the central concept that I discuss in the thesis, in the essay, is Matka Ojczyzna, which literally means mother fatherland, but also connotes mother homeland. And the word Ojczyzna, before it became associated with homeland, referred to an inheritance from a father to son, because father in Polish is ojciec, evoking the tropes of origin, belonging, land, and home. However, matka and ojczyzna, as well as matka ojczyzna, in Polish have a grammatically feminine gender. This deep irony of the term brings to the fore the different connotations of mother fatherland as the homeland, as a sanctified mother of all Polish people, and the need for unified effort and sacrifice of Polish women and men with clearly assigned gender roles and the male leadership. And that male leadership is something very specific, as Maria Janion says, to Polish national thought and discourse. And this is evident in my essay, with predominantly male playwright being discussed, but at the end, I give voices to women, and I end with voices of women. The Matka Ojczyzna overlap with homeland helps to understand that this not unusual gendered imagining of homeland as part of nation building in Poland takes specifically turn with intersecting with exile as homelessness and the national course homelessness, because as the lack of independence, evoking links between bondage, exile, and motherlessness. And the first part of my essay briefly situates this particular imagining in the socio-political and historical context, rooting the discussion in the defining impact that the place of the 1830s, so-called Great Emigration, had on Polish theater. I look at how the so-called Polish great migrants politicized motherhood and mother-son bond, setting up the scene for a migrant artist to fight for and perform Poland's freedom. Here I look at some examples of motherlessness in relation to mother-fatherland and to actual mothers in works by Juliusz Słowacki and Adam Mickiewicz, and how they imagine the cure or the freedom to the communal and individual motherlessness as the sacred blood and milk oath, connecting Poland, Poles and mother fatherland. And the embodiment of this oath is the figure of a sonless Polish mother. And through the present acts of birthing and raising children, or rather sons, she bridges Poland's past and future. Or more bluntly, she births, feeds with breast milk made of her blood, and raises sons so they die for Poland's freedom, like Mary raised Jesus to die for humanity's sins. That metaphor is very present in the writing. And in the second part of the essay, I focus on post-World War II and contemporary dialogues with romantic traditions. And I look at examples from Pieszo or On Foot by Sławomir Mrożek, Antigone in New York by Janusz Słowacki, and Martyna Majok Ironbound and Sanctuary, and how they return to romantic tropes of motherhood and exile to reflect on times of political and social uncertainty, and how they gradually move beyond the national context. And Majok in particular is one of the women whose voices I end my essay with, showing how on the one hand she frees metaphor of exile as motherlessness from specifically Polish and nationalistic overtones, and on the other hand the tropes of migration, motherhood and Poland still significantly play part in her plays. And it is important to point out, as I do in my essay, that in 2020, so now, this migration motherhood nation nexus continue to play a major role within Polish politics of memory, from far right to left discourses. But tonight, I really want to mention a postscriptum to my essay, so extend the discussion as Sylvia suggested. A few days ago, Poland, in 75% turnout, election ended the liberal and autocratic rule of Prawo and Sprawiedliwość party. Poles at home and in migration queued for hours to the polls. However, as the statistics suggest, it was the votes of women, and for the first time in Poland, more women voted than men, that saved Poland from the far-right bondage. And as research shows, the choice of not to be a mother was top priority for voting. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kazia, and thank you for the wonderful news from Poland. And then we hear from Miranda next.
Thank you, Ambrose, and good evening, everybody. It's lovely to have such a big group here to celebrate the launch of this incredible collection. So my chapter focuses on the work of Shakespeare. My chapter looks at Romeo and Juliet and Pericles as case studies of Shakespeare's approach to migration. The interesting thing about Shakespeare's works are that they're rarely set in England. We have city comedies about London life from Shakespeare's contemporaries like Ben Jonson or Thomas Dekker, and these are really popular. So why doesn't Shakespeare go in for this? Why does he look outwards rather than inwards? Now, I'm not here to make an argument about Shakespeare's supposed universality or how from the very moment of composition his works have strived to speak to a global audience. I simply don't buy that as a deliberate intention. If anything, I think the traffic goes the other way. What I think we can argue is that his cultural longevity may be in some way thanks to the fact that he doesn't set the majority of his plays in a fictionalized version of the London that he lived and worked in. Rather, we have plays from him set in Venice, in Verona, in Rome, Bohemia, Egypt. He writes history plays that do depict England, but even then, it's an England of the past, dislocated from the present. And I think Shakespeare's strategy of dislocation may have been one of practical and theatrical necessity. If you consider the playing practices of the public theatres of London in the 16th and 17th century, what we have are large stages with non-realistic sets. Instead, we have wooden pillars painted to look like marble, sumptuously decorated ceilings to represent the heavens, and a trapdoor leading down to a hell space. If you think about the exterior appearance of these theatres, the Globe, for example, would have been completely whitewashed with lime as a sort of considered adaptation of a classical Roman amphitheatre. If you walk down South Bank today and see the exposed beams that are a feature of Shakespeare's Globe, these are actually an inaccuracy which pandered to the modern visitor's expectation of a Tudor style, whereas a crucial feature of the original Globe Theatre was that it stood out from the surrounding Renaissance buildings as a site of difference, as a place to experience exoticism. And once again, I think that this is dislocation by design. When audiences walked down the bank of the Thames and strolled into the Globe, they were stepping out of the everyday. The early modern amphitheatre stage was approximately 13 meters by 8, but it contains all sorts of possible worlds. And so when I was approached to write this chapter on Shakespeare's treatment of exile, banishment, and migration, my first response was excitement. My second one was one of sheer overwhelm, because I couldn't offhand think of any Shakespeare play that doesn't deal with any of these themes. These are plays that deal with shipwrecks, Comedy of Errors, Twelfth Night, The Tempest, plays with banishment, Coriolanus, Romeo and Juliet, Richard II, characters who are sent abroad or otherwise are strangers in a strange land, like Hamlet, like Othello, like Pericles. Characters who lose their status or their security and find themselves at the mercy of nature, like King Lear, and the characters in As You Like It and Midsummer Night's Dream. Across tragedy and comedy, dislocation, relocation is a persistent occupation. Shakespeare's drama seems almost obsessively predicated on strangeness and relocation. Depending, of course, which genre we find ourselves in, this can lead to reunion and the creation of new communities, or a loss that can never be repaired. So why does Shakespeare focus so much on these themes? And early modern playing practicalities aside, and being rather flippant and glib here for just a second, the topic simply makes very good theatre, structurally and emotionally. Banishment is inherently theatrical. According to Jane Kingsley Smith, she writes that it is dramatic almost to excess. Inclusion and exclusion are performative processes. But more than this, I think Shakespeare's dramas of exile enable a considered examination of the relationship between home and identity. He's writing at simultaneously the birth of English commercial theatre and the start of travel and discovery that begins projects of imperialism and colonialism. Shakespeare's theatre is one where characters are primed to lose and find themselves. And since then, Shakespeare has been used across the political spectrum, his words quoted as a radical voice of acceptance and humanity, but his plays have also been deployed to scapegoat minorities and to justify their exclusion and extradition. Shakespeare's global success has in itself become a badge of British exceptionalism used to justify colonialization and legitimize and construct white supremacy. So Shakespeare's legacy, I think, overall remains somewhat mixed on the prospect of exile and migration, but it's never indifferent. And I'll stop there. But thank you for organising this. It's a fascinating and fantastic event to be a part of.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Miranda. Dislocation by design. I think that might be a framework for the times we are living in as well. And then we hear from Sarit next.
Thank you, Ambrose, and thank you, Yana and Steve. My chapter is named All Our Migrants, Place and Displacement on the Israeli Stage. And in it, I have explored 3 types of representation of displacement. First, the Holocaust survivor. Second, the Palestinian exile following the establishment of the State of Israel in 1948. And finally, the representation of African refugees of the 2000s. A major concern of Israeli theater is its response to the experience of migration, which is part of the collective memory of almost all of its spectators. Nearly every Israeli citizen has experienced displacement, if not in their own lives, at least through their parents. For Israeli Jews, to tackle migration means triggering both the myth of the exodus from Egypt and the memory of the devastation of the Holocaust. The year 2018, says Maya Buenos, a young Israeli theater director, can be seen as catalyzing the comparison between African asylum seekers in Israel and Jewish refugees in the past. That was the year in which the Israeli government attempted to relocate some of them to various African states. Many Israelis protested, declaring they would hide African refugees in their own homes. The government abandoned the project. The presence of refugees has occasioned a heated debate in Israel. Now the Jews finally have a home and a state and are not forced to move from place to place. Should they not show compassion towards today's refugees? The shows about and with asylum seekers contribute to the ongoing debate in Israel. One camp claiming that since we are all migrants, we should be more empathic towards today's refugees, and the other demanding they be deported. As a case study, one of the canonical Israeli plays tackling the Holocaust was Hayelet Holem, The Child Dreams, from 1993 by Hanoch Levin. When the play was first staged in 1993, we could read it in the local context, wrapped in memories we heard from Holocaust survivors and from the harsh images the occupation of Arab territories provided to the newscast. When restaged in 2018, following the bloody war in Syria, the death journeys of Sudanese and Eritrean refugees through Sinai to Israel in an attempt to seek refuge, and waves of refugees trying to reach Europe, the show took on universal dimensions, testifying to the horrors of war in the 21st century. The Palestinian displacement in Israeli theater Contrary to the Jewish view of a promised land, the Palestinian narrative relates to place and land in a most concrete fashion. The play that I would like to bring as a case study is Longing from 2003. It begins with a line, Watni Hakiba in Arabic, meaning my homeland is a suitcase, from a poem by the de facto national Palestinian poet Mahmoud Darwish. My homeland is a suitcase. I am a traveler. That was the opening statement of the show. But in the next few weeks, anger arose around the poem following first criticism from the Israeli-Palestinian audience, and Darwish decided to rewrite these lines as, my homeland is not a suitcase. I am not a traveler. The Israeli-Palestinian audience's insistence on not accepting the suitcase and the wandering as a settled condition suggests that spectators, in a painful inverted symmetry with Israeli Jews, do not view themselves as eternal wanderers in exile from their homeland, but rather as refugees clinging to a concrete land as their physical homeland. As for African refugees in Israeli theater, the case study that I have chosen is that of the director Yana Meerzon, who formed the theater company Cholot Legislative Theater with a group of illegal African asylum seekers from a detention center in the south of Israel. The center opened in 2013 following a number of government decisions aimed at reducing the concentration of asylum seekers in cities. It was shut down after 4 years. Alon would visit Cholot 1 day a week and engage a group of asylum seekers using Augusto Boal's Theater of the Oppressed method. The theater and their shows emerged from an 18-month process of development. In the legislative theater methodology, actors and audience retain the right to discuss and rectify various legal decisions and change the laws. To conclude, Israeli artists have spoken about how they identify with refugees because of their Jewish past. I quote, I hold on to my Jewish identity through the feeling of refugee, unquote. That was Maya Bueno says, another Israeli director who has worked with African asylum seeker actors, and Yana Meerzon had refugee grandparents. Cholot Legislative Theater even enacted a scene from The Child Dreams, where one of the characters asserts, quote, what happened to the Jewish people in the Holocaust must not happen again. We must define the duty of the countries of the civilized world to give asylum to refugees, unquote. On the other hand, the analogy between Palestinian and Jewish displacement is fraught with divergent political meanings. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sarit. Thank you. So there's before we move into the next group, you mentioned illegal African asylum seekers, and I'm also aware that in is it Italy or Spain? There's clandestino. In Britain, there is the current Home Secretary is really driving to normalize illegal immigrant. Before we move into the next group, maybe if I could have some reflections on those terms. I will start with you, Sarit.
Okay. You're asking about ex-theatrical situation.
No. The term you mentioned illegal African asylum seeker.
Oh, you mean why that's the term is used in Israel?
Yeah. Can I have maybe some reflection on the term?
Oh, well, in my chapter I explained that most of these asylum seekers want to get to Europe. Israel is the only land bridge between Africa, North Africa, and basically Syria and Turkey, and from there to Europe. So most of them come with the intention to pass and go on to Europe. So they don't have any documents or something that expresses their willing to stay in Israel, but some are stuck in Israel and some are in between or eventually stay for many years, and they get temporary permits to work. So as I said, there was a huge debate whether to relocate them to Africa or get some other status. Mostly just get temporary permits to work, and they are, and very few get the status of asylum seekers.
Thank you very much. And then okay. So before we go into the next group, if there are any Palestinian contributors to the chapter, if you'd like to speak, please let me know as well. We will be more than happy to accommodate you. And then for the next group, we look at we will hear from Carol Fisher, Soren Frey, who is at the University of California, and has got a chapter on the things she carried, the vertical migrations of Lady Rokuyo in Japanese theater, Maria Belova from Washington, D.C., who's got a chapter on German theater, and August von Kosku's theatrical success and pitfalls in Russia. We've also got Lisa Pastel from the University of York, theater as refrain, representations of departure from the Terezim, Teresi that ghetto. And we've got Matthew Posey from Trinity College, who's got a chapter on theater's digital migration. And we've also got one more speaker. We've got Hila. Yana, do you want to introduce Hila?
Thank you, everybody. Thanks. We probably have to have a little break for a second, so lots of people leaving, but I know that Hala Nassar is on the call as well, and she would be willing to speak a little bit about her chapter, because that talks about Palestinian exile very specifically. So just before other people leave, I just wanted to let people know that the book series, we'll talk a little bit about the book series, at the end of the call. And for many of you might know that this event and this work, will continue in the forum of the working group, international working group, so on theater, migration, and nationalism. And so we started putting together a special set of events. So with one of them, the next one, this next one, scheduled for November 24, and we will be looking at the interdisciplinary research methods, that we need to use talking about the subject. And later in January, we will be looking at historical perspective on migration. And finally, we will be organizing a special event. We'll be applying for a meeting of the group within the framework of Canadian Association of Theatre Research in June 24. So I know that some people are already part of the group and interested in participation. If you're interested but did not hear from me or would like to hear from us a little bit more, please do not hesitate to let us know. Thank you so much. And now we're going back to the third group, and I probably call Carol, on the call to speak about her chapter. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And as everyone, I would like to thank the editors and the publishers for making this incredible book and this launch possible. It's very, very exciting to be a part of it. I've written on something which is slightly different from the mainstream. I'm talking about what I call vertical migration, which is something that is very typical in Japanese theater. It's not the migration of people, but it's the migration of ideas from the past into the present. It could be defined as the chronological movement, transmission, and retrieval of knowledge, skills, and historical cultural memory. And it differs from intertextuality because vertical migration is always and specifically chronological. And it is also both culturally and linguistically insular. In contrast, an intertextual work may range over many languages and cultures, as well as many times. Now, Japanese language, as I'm sure many of you know, is very unusual. It's may or may not be related to any other languages, but if it is, it's related very minimally to one or two languages, maybe Korean, maybe Hungarian. Not Chinese, as most people might think it is, although it's borrowed much of the Chinese writing system. And because of this insularity, the Japanese culture keeps referring to itself over and over again. One of the great classics of Japanese culture is the Tale of Genji, written around 1004 CE, and it's often called the world's first novel. It was written by a woman named Murasaki Shikibu. This novel has many, many plot threads in it. But the one that I'm going to be talking about is about Lady Rokuju. Lady Rokujo was one of Prince Genji's many lovers. He basically kicked her out or left her for a younger woman, Ori, who he marries. Rokujo is heartbroken. And in the novel, her spirit, her soul, unknown to herself, leaves her body and attacks the pregnant wife, Aoi. In the novel, there are various attempts by primarily female, but also male spiritual practitioners to save poor Aoi. But successful, Aoi dies and gives birth to Genji's son. Now, in the novel, Rokujo finally learns of her guilt and is horrified and becomes a Buddhist nun. Now, this story, which is one of many in this great tale, like many of the others, has been adapted over and over and over again by primarily male playwrights over the centuries in Japan. The first and most important one, of course, is Zeami, who wrote a play called the Oi no Ue, written about 400 years after the original novel. So it was written around 1400. And in this case, we see that Rokujo is depicted as a female demon who must be exorcised by a male Buddhist priest after the failure of various female practitioners. Aoi is neither pregnant nor does she survive. She does survive. I'm sorry, she is not pregnant, but she does survive in this one. Now, it's interesting, the reasons why he changed this have, of course, to do with who he was writing for. He was writing for his new bosses, not the former aristocrats, not the former imperial court, but rather brash new shogun, a military young man who had taken over won wars that had been going on for generations and completely transformed the government. So the shift in power from male to female, the shift of life and death, represents in many ways the reversal of the traditional power structure. So it's mirrored in the gender reversal. Now we see this kind of shifting of the gender dynamics and of the plays of the story's original plot over and over and over again. So in this chapter, I skip forward then to the present, basically to the 20th century and the 21st century, to show how the political situation and the cultural situation in Japan informs the ways in which several contemporary and near contemporary male playwrights have taken this very same story, vertically migrated it, and transformed it for their own needs. So I first look at Mishima Yukio's 1954 adaptation, where he sets it in a psychiatric hospital in the present. As you may know, Mishima was a very right-wing emperor worshiper, and he wished for Japan to go back to its pre-war militaristic self. He shows in his play the ways in which Genji, who represents Japan, must go back to Rokujo, to him the symbol of the old world, and give up his sickly westernized wife. Must find the true Japan. Very different from what happens in later plays. 25 years later, Harajiro in 1979 wrote a play called Two Women, in which he really reverses Mishima's version. While it also takes place in an insane asylum, Rokujo, rather than Aoi, is the one who is hospitalized. Who is crazy? The old version is crazy, not the new one. So eventually in this one, Kara was writing about the children of those very people that Mishima had been writing about. Mishima's people were those who could remember the pre-war time. Kara's people, the children of Mishima's group, were the 60s generation. And like our 60s generation in Japan, they had witnessed and participated in violent anti-US demonstrations, protests against Vietnam, protests to transform the universities, and so on. His play actually mourns both the failure of youthful 60s idealism and the kind of what he called worker ants that these formerly idealistic students had become. The same story is then reworked yet another quarter century later. So it's interesting to me that each of these contemporary playwrights that I'm talking about are basically 25 years or one generation apart. And we see the transformations of Japan in each of those times. So the next one is the 2003 play written by Kawamura Takeshi. And like each of the previous ones, it shows the world turned upside down. In this case, the people, the young people in the world of 2003 have seen Japan go through more and more changes. The basic world that they had, that their parents and their grandparents had established and had understood was gone, because in 1989, the emperor, who had been ruling since 1926, taken Japan through all of its militaristic period, all through the war, all through the post-war, he died. This one person who had been like the symbol for Japan for so long. That goes along with so many of the other things that happened in the world, which affected Japan this time. The end of the Cold War at the same time, the collapse of Japan's bubble economy, the 1995 Kobe earthquake, which was devastating, the deadly sarin attacks in the Tokyo subways, the unending demands by other Asian countries that Japan apologized for its wartime behavior, and so on and so on. And even in 2003, same year that the play was written, Japan's apparent failure to acknowledge and to abide by its own constitution by sending military troops into the Gulf War. It was a time when people could not understand anything that was going on. And so Kawamura sets his play, interestingly, in a beauty salon, a place of outer beauty where there is nothing to do with the internal life. Aoi is an escaped mental patient. The past and the present merged. Memories of everything from the atomic bombings to recent events are in this complex work. And it's ultimately a very misogynistic vision that implies that both the past and the present are equally insane and that all action is futile. We might as well just enjoy the crazy show. Now, so I'd like to just conclude by saying that what I tried to do in this chapter is to show how these various male playwrights in different time periods transformed a female work, a female written work, which had been originally not political, had been originally very much for the entertainment of other women who were trapped really in the imperial household, but which has become a classic in Japan that everyone in Japan knows. In order to have vertical migration, everyone needs to know these stories. We can have vertical migration in a way in the rest of the world when you're talking about, say, Greek tragedy, when most educated people will know that, or Shakespeare, when most educated people know that. You can, in a multicultural context. But in Japan, with its very insulated language, its very insulated people who do not often accept physical migrants from other countries, their vertical migration tends to be a very insular, specific, and Japanese, so shall we say? Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much, Carol. Thank you. And then we hear from Maria next.
Hello, everybody. Let me share one image. Okay, I would like to thank the organizers of this event and our editors, Yana and Steve. Thank you so much for editing this collection and your ongoing help and support. So I offer in my chapter a historical perspective, and I write about nomadic artists and German theater in St. Petersburg at the end of the 18th, the beginning of the 19th century. And at this time, St. Petersburg was a cosmopolitan city where different European cultures coexisted. The Russian capital had French, Italian, and German theaters. And unlike Italian and French theaters, German theater was its own world, aimed mostly at German immigrants and at the representatives of Russian elite who were interested in German culture and literature and who were fluent in German language. So I write about these nomadic artists, the conditions of their work at the German theater in St. Petersburg, the reasons why they came to St. Petersburg to show performances. And my case study is German playwright August von Kotzebue. And I look at his 2 stays in St. Petersburg in 1780s when he was an assistant director of the German theater, and at his 2nd stay in 1800 and 1801 when he was a director of the German theater. And 2nd stay of Kotzebue in Russia is particularly remarkable because it reflects the spirit of his adventurous dramas. He went to St. Petersburg to visit his sons, and on the Russian border, he was arrested, searched, and exiled in Siberia without any explanation. And the reasons for this arrest are unclear, but they might be a few possibilities, and I will outline a couple. First is the tyrannic Emperor Paul I of Russia wanted to promote horror among authors, and therefore he arrested Kotzebue. The second possibility that it could have been Kotzebue's play about the revolt in far east part of Russia, Kamchatka, that provoked his arrest, and the fact that he fell in disfavor with Paul I. After 4 months in exile, Paul I signed a decree which freed Kotzebue and returned him to St. Petersburg. And this decision of Paul I is also doesn't have any explanations, but one, that Paul I read Kotzebue's play under the title The Old Personal Coachman of Peter III, a true anecdote. And the play was in the spirit of royalist propaganda and depicted an ideal picture of German immigrants living in St. Petersburg under the protection of Russian ruler. And apparently Kotzebue knew how to flatter government, and he succeeded in flattering Paul I because there were obvious allusions to Paul I's father, Peter III, and Paul I himself in the play. So Kotzebue was let free and sent to St. Petersburg and appointed as a director of the German theater. And Kotzebue left his memoirs, The Strangest Year of My Life, where he writes about his arrest, his exile in Siberia, and his work at the German theater in St. Petersburg, the condition of work for German artists, the repertoire, the work he've done, the improvement he've done. And he also writes how difficult it was for him as a German playwright to write plays under the restrictions of Russian censorship. So during his first stay, Kotzebue worked in Russia for 1 year, and after the assassination of Paul I, he left Russia, but remained his relationship with this country and St. Petersburg in particular, which he viewed as his second hometown because Kotzebue also had Russian citizenship. So in my chapter, I looked at how Kotzebue's cosmopolitan nature meshed well with the internationally diverse life in St. Petersburg. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Maria. And then we hear from Lisa.
Good evening, everyone. And I would also like to echo what everyone has said, that many thanks to Steve and Yana. It's been an ideal editing process, and I am so pleased to be a part of this volume. My contribution is called Theater as Refrain, Representations of Departure from the Terezin/Theresienstadt Ghetto. In this chapter, I write about theatrical scripts that were written by prisoners in the World War II Jewish ghetto, called Theresienstadt in German, and in Czech, Terezin. Terezin is located about 40 miles northwest of Prague. So I'm looking at transports of the Czech Jewish prisoners to the ghetto as a form of internal migration. They were forcibly deported by passenger train to a known destination in their own country. Much more terrifying, however, were the cattle trains that left the ghetto at irregular intervals, carrying thousands of prisoners to destinations that were unknown to them, unfortunately far too well known to us, mainly to Auschwitz. But while they remained in Terezin, some of the Czech Jews became involved in the ghetto's now famous cultural life, and they wrote and staged plays about their experience in the many theatrical spaces in the ghetto. In fact, by the summer of 1944, there were 18 different performance spaces in the ghetto. A few of these original plays represented their arrival. Many more of the plays, often in the form of cabarets, represented daily life in the ghetto. But in my chapter, I focus on plays about their future, their imagined departure from Terezin. From the prisoner's point of view, there were really only three ways out: liberation at the end of the war, death in the ghetto itself, or deportation on one of these mysterious and much feared outgoing trains. So I read the prisoner's scripts through Deleuze and Guattari's concept of the refrain as a way that territories can be established through practice. How do the prisoners establish the stages of the ghetto as territories through familiar theatrical practices from which they could send out, as Deleuze and Guattari say, a thread of a tune into an uncertain future? As these scripts reveal, the prisoners engage with the threat of deportation and death by containing them within familiar theatrical forms. And I'll just mention two of the plays specifically. For example, one of them is a drama in verse that draws upon the myth of Orpheus. Although Orpheus perishes in the end, in his dying moments, he expresses his hope that his music will somehow live on. Another play is a satirical comedy called Prince Bettliegen, about the prisoners' efforts to keep themselves off of the lists for these outgoing transports. Although most of the play is comic, it includes one profoundly mournful song. And when one of the characters sings these lyrics, which were written by prisoner František Kovanec to a well-known melancholy jazz melody. And I'll just recite some of the lyrics. Just a number, not a name. Thin skin covering a frame. In weather foul or fair, delivered here and there. That's my suitcase, and that's me. And the song extends this metaphor and then concludes, if I'm lucky, I'll just lose my shirt. If I'm not, I'll lose me. So in conclusion, through these scripts, on the stages of the ghetto with their fellow prisoners, I argue that the Czech Jews were able to contemplate and face a range of possible futures without being overwhelmed by fear. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Carol. I like the connections, the threads between your presentation and Saris as well about the suitcase, and also the reflections on memory that we've had just now. Next, we hear from Matthew.
Hello. We're getting toward the end of the second hour, and I guess I don't know if I'll be the last speaker. I don't know if there'll be another, but I'll try to be brief in my comments. My paper chapter that's included is called Theater's Digital Migration, and when I first began to work on it and had submitted it to Yana and Steve, they challenged me in a really interesting, very wise way to think about the way that I was using the term migration and whether or not I was using it as a metaphor rather than looking at the actual political, physical, real world problems that exist around migration. And when I began to think about it, because the simple premise of my essay is that the way in which we practice theater is migrating from the live to the virtual. And of course, you can extend that into our daily lives as well, given this, even now as I appear on a small screen, we are migrating, for better or for worse, towards virtual domains and environments and means of communication. And what I'd suggest in my paper is that this is virtual, but real. And these transitions, which we see are having such a profound effect on the youth, in the manners in which they attempt to adjust to identity and figuring that, to the manner in which migrants are surveilled and controlled and turned into alphanumerical avatars to be followed, of which we all experience that in our lives now, whether or not you're living in an advanced technological society and have those privileges to use that technology at your own disposal, or you don't, and you're removed from that completely. We are all sort of within this data sphere and a particular, what we might call, post-digital condition that we live within. So I thank Yana and Steve for having helped me direct my argument to take that into account and not fall into the trap of a apolitical metaphor on that. And even I was going to say, I thank Ambrose for his positioning us in our own particular historical moment where we look upon with horror what's taking place. So I try to take these questions into aspect and look at theoretical, philosophical question, also a couple of case studies on works that use these kinds of technologies, new technologies, to explore the manner in which theater works. And one of those is called To Be a Machine, which is being done by an Irish theater company called Dead Center. Some of you may have seen it, some of you may have experienced it. A fascinating, really useful way of thinking about identity in digital spaces and being a data subject in a post-digital condition, and what that means and what we lose, what we sacrifice, what takes place, and what happens to the theater within that space. And another less radical, kind of more commercial oriented work from the Royal Shakespeare Company where they developed a work around Midsummer Night's Dream using virtual technologies and interactivity in order to do that. But I know that it's late in the day, so I'm just going to share one small paragraph from my chapter that I think may position what I was trying to say and entice you perhaps to read it later. I say, while many of the world's migrants grapple with the real world traumas, injustices, and challenges of their situation, and the world itself attempts to come to terms with the changes necessary to guarantee the rights of these people, the digital migration continues and accelerates. The equating of the situations is inappropriate, inaccurate, historically ignorant, and politically suspect. But what the digital transition might learn from the migrant is the knowledge that what is lost in any migration is primarily one's homeland. To leave one's home is to risk one's safety, history, family, connections, knowledge, ownership, meaning, and purpose, one's identity. And the theater's dwelling place will be at times more or less lost to that. Theater's home is in the here and the now. Abandoned for the digital realms, the risks are real for the journey from home. We may be lost. What may be lost may not be easily regained, rebuilt, or returned. The fact is already well known to the real world global migrants whose struggle endures. So what is lost, of course, in the home of the theater is its place in the here and the now. Its ontological structure shifted to a here and a not here, a now and a not now, which takes place in various spaces in atemporal forms. So the question that remains, and I try to pursue, is what takes place to that? What happens to our identity? What happens to our technologies of representation? and to a certain degree, how will the world function in this new post-digital condition? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Matthew. I really love the questions that you're asking because of the changes as well that are happening with technology, how pervasive AI is becoming, how pervasive surveillance technologies are becoming as well, and what does this mean for theater, for us as people, for connectivity, for communing. Yeah, so they are very, they're questions of our times. And then we hear from Hala next. Yes, if you could unmute yourself.
Okay. Evening, everybody. My name is Hala Nassar, and I'm speaking from Bethlehem, Palestine, in the midst of the war zone. When I started writing my chapter, it was at the time when there was an invasion on Gaza in 2021. And my chapter is simply about taking two cases and the power of storytelling. And I rely on Fanon in that sense. And at the same time, I rely on Edward Said's words, where he, during the civil war in Lebanon, he used to tell his friends, write things down, write your experience down. And the title of my chapter is Chronicles of Refugees Foretold. And apparently, the events when I wrote my chapter are repeating themselves now. And at that time in 2021, it was for 10 days. And now we are more than 10 days into the bloodshed. I take two cases. One is play Taha, and by the actor Ali Hlehel, and the other one is The Ali by Samia Qazmouz Bakri. Both of them, in one way or another, try to commemorate the Nakba, which started in 1948, and it's still going. It also shows you how memory, although, you know, basically the both plays are built on the memory of the ones who survived the Nakba, and they remember the landscape, the geography, the houses, the architect of things that were, and they are no longer now, because they have been changed once the state of Israel came into being. They also, I try at the end to see how the theater, sorry, I have a voice problem, how theater and the stage, that is the outside, where the past and the present collide with the outside events and the inside being in stage, and until this moment try to resolve the unresolvable events that we are going through. Also, I try to say that these plays, they are commemorating the Nakba that is ongoing, but trying at the same time to defy the Israeli occupation that is ongoing, of course, and documenting. The most important thing is documenting. And the rest of the story is about the resilience of refugees, the residents to stay put and resist what may come in the face of continuous annihilation and erasure of not only the landscape, but of memory, and apparently now of people themselves. So we are, as if 1948 hasn't stopped, and now the Gazans are asked to leave to Sinai deserts, and there are strong rumors that the West Bank is next. Sorry, but I've been called to talk about my chapter in the last minute, and I appreciate the gesture. And thank you so much, Yana and Steve and Ambrose, for organizing this. And it's a good distraction in the midst of the shells outside and the bloodshed. Thank you.
I'm really sorry for what's happening, Pala. I really wish and hope that this conflict will be resolved in our time. And but before you go, maybe you mentioned you mentioned the Nakba. Maybe you could explain what the Nakba is.
The Nakba is 1948. The Arab troops lost the battle for defending the so-called historic Palestine, in which everyone now is denying, and where 750,000 were expelled, and they became refugees in the neighboring Arab countries and to the rest of the world, even all the way to Africa and China. You could find Palestinians and Latin America. 7,050. I can't say the figure anymore. And the state of Israel came into being, and in 1967, the rest of the West Bank was taken over, and all became the state of Israel. The West Bank up till now is under Israeli occupation, and Gaza is an entity of itself because of the fragmentation and because of the wall that they built around the West Bank. So it's meant to stand, you know, worse than South Africa, where the land is not connected. And so historic Palestine remains in the memory, but it's reenacted and reenacted over and over and over again, as if the Palestinian theater itself is stuck in the events of the Nakba of 1948. Even the place that took place in the summer were site-specific theater, they were all about events of the Nakba. So the outside and the inside, the stage and the audience, there's no separation. They keep colliding and they keep merging. And so that's, and what we see today is also, and the bloodshed in Gaza, it's also the result of the occupation in 1948. And it's been 77 years, almost.
And this is a question for you, and also for Israeli scholars who are present. How do we resolve this? Well, and what can we do as theater practitioners and as artists? What can we do?
Well, being in the West Bank now, when I returned from the US in 2017, I haven't been to Jerusalem once, although it's around 6 kilometers away from where I am in Bethlehem. And because of the wall, and we need military pass. What can be done? Well, they tried the peace process, it faltered, it's not working. And we need military pass. And as they say, we are human animals. The thing is, if you start looking at the other as an equal human being, we wouldn't have been in this situation. But if you keep looking at us as the other who don't deserve dignity and quality and freedom like everyone human being, then we are going to end up refugees as we have ended up in 1948. The amount and the number of Palestinians outside Palestine exceed the number who are here. They are in the thousands and millions everywhere. What can be done? Talking to each other and respecting that we are human beings, that we deserve dignity and freedom and justice like everyone else. And that bloodshed will stop. As long as there is an oppressor and the oppressed, you are going to see clashes over and over again. And they are not going to stop. And the bloodshed now is 3,500 already killed. And the pain is on both sides. There is a scholar at the Hebrew University If I talk to him and if he talks to me, both we are labeled criminals. And so, yes, theater could help. Peace process could help, but not that peace process they signed, because one is advantage and the other is on the disadvantage side. You need to go back to UN resolutions. They are there, the international law that will protect everyone and will stop the bloodshed. I don't know, we are in a state of watching the TV non-stop whenever we have electricity. We're lucky that electricity is not cut off tonight, lucky me. And no schools, nothing, no universities, we're not teaching, we tried online. And everyone is just waiting for the end to come, as if.
Is there anyone else who wants to add something, say something? I think we supposed to, I think we can hold this space for a little while so that we process what's happening.
Thank you
I
so
wouldn't
much.
mind saying something, Ambrose, if possible.
Thank you, Ala. Thank you.
Pleasure.
And I'm really sorry about what's happening. Yes, Barrington.
You were asking if anybody wanted to say something, Ambrose? Yeah?
Carry on. Yeah.
Okay. I've yet to acquire a copy of the publication, but congratulations to all those who made it in and completed their papers. I think listening to all the different speakers tonight, I think the main thing that comes to mind is something that's on the surface sounds simple. So I'm going to share it with you. And the thought is to do with language. I've always thought about language in terms of opposites, whether it's black and white, phrases like us and them. And maybe there lies the key in terms of language, because maybe as long as there's a us and a them, as opposed to a we, there will be problems throughout the world and in different countries. And that's the thought that came to mind. The other thought that come to mind is also to do with history. How, in terms of different populations or populace, do we move on from our history, you know, from the pain and the suffering throughout the world, you know? So I'm not necessarily saying that that helps, but as I said, maybe part of it lies in language, the way language can be used in such an inflammatory way, and finding, as has been said by the previous speaker, the common ground, our humanness. Thank you.
Thank you, Barrington, for this special intervention, because we were basically, the project was kind of talking into that idea that we need to look for the dialogue, we need to look for the language, we need to look for something, you know, that will allow us to be in one space. We are in one space. It is very, very small place, which called Earth, you know, and so on. And unfortunately, we didn't hear today from Paul Wright, who was talking about climate migration and another kind of general, you know, so disaster that awaits us. I don't want to do this, but unfortunately we are past 2 hours and we promised to be on time, because, and I really would like to thank everybody on the call for your patience, for your hard work, for your passionate words, you know, and for your passion for this subject. I wanted to also just briefly bring people's attention to the fact that the work is ongoing. We would like to hear from you in terms of the book series. There are very different ways you can contribute, either with full monographs or with edited collections, or with a smaller piece of writings, so which is called Pivot series. It's a smaller piece that you might want to write in your own voice, or about your own work, or about the project that you just done or thinking of doing. So we're really looking for that. And as I mentioned earlier as well, so this book created a call for creating a special working group on theater and migration, international working group, which originally we were thinking of hosting at University of Ottawa. Then we thought we will probably move it to the International Federation of Theatre Research, and for now we will be looking for a home at the Canadian Association of Theatre Research. All of that said, is that we will be mostly holding meetings online, because it's the only way to connect us right now in this scholarly space, if you want, in the digital space, and we would like to take advantage, from this digital possibilities. So thank you, huge thank you to everybody, to Ambrose for holding the space, and I'll just, give Steve a moment to say something as well. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Yana, and thank you very much, Ambrose, and thank you to all the contributors who participated, and those who were looking in and participating virtually. I just want to say that this has been a marvelous project to find a conclusion to, but as Yana is saying, it's not finishing, because we're moving on to the book series, and we hope that many of you will want to contribute books in the future to our book series. So we're looking forward to book proposals from you, as well as ideas, so be happy to hear from any of you. So thanks again, Ambrose and Yana, and all the contributors and all those participants.
And it's now falls on me to say thank you very much to everyone for attending this book launch, where we were launching the Palgrave Handbook of Theatre and Migration. And thank you to Yana and Steve for the really amazing work that you put into this handbook. And thank you also to everyone who spoke. It has been absolutely wonderful being part of this absolutely amazing book, which I am sure is going to be a resource for scholars for many years to come. The next event in the Forced Migration in the Arts series is taking place on the last Thursday of this month, which is going to be the 26th of October. And for that session, we are looking at comic books and graphic novels. You are all welcome to join that session as well. And if you've got any thoughts, any reflections on the book launch that we've just had, or on the series, those comments are welcome as well. You can send them to us at civicleicester@gmail.com. So without more from me, thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.